Welcome to 80s TV Ladies with your hosts, Sharon Johnson and Susan Lambert-Haddam.
Hello, I'm Sharon.
And I'm Susan. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Yes, we are. And today we are here to talk about moonlighting.
We so rarely get to talk just you and I together anymore because we have so many amazing guests on and it's sort of become a more interview show. But I miss when just you and I can go, oh, and remember this, and this is what I think, and all that stuff. So we're going to do that.
Yeah,
moonlighting.
So far we've managed to do that at least once per show. I kind of miss it too, but that said, I wouldn't trade any of our guests at all. So it's a great problem, if you will, to have.
So this is a great episode to listen to in preparation and then go and start our moonlighting episodes from Glenn Gordon Caron.
So for the uninitiated, Moonlighting was a television show that aired on ABC Television Network in the late 80s. And it was about a former supermodel who falls on hard times thanks to her crooked business manager and finds her only remaining asset is a detective agency. And so she's decided to get involved on a day-to-day basis to help run the business. So the Blue Moon Detective Agency, Maddie is now determined to find clients and solve cases so that they can make some money. And they actually do have some success, which is a little surprising insofar as her not having any experience and the sort of haphazard way the office seems to be managed or run or not. So, it's a fun show.
It's so interesting now to recognize, based on what, Glenn Gordon Caron says about the show, which is that he didn't understand the detective genre and why it was popular and why every show had to be a detective show. And he wanted to kill it, basically. What he wanted to do was send it up. And so that, I think, explains a lot of the things that were inexplicable about the show was he really didn't care to make logical sense. And it does make you think about the detective genre, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Frankly, for me, the detective-y part of it wasn't the best part of the show anyway.
What was the best part of the show, Sharon?
Well, the best part of the show were the characters and the interaction and some of the license that Glenn Gordon Caron and the writers took with how they put together each episode. Not just the whole fourth wall breaking aspect of it, which was always kind of fun, but just the episodes themselves. I mean, the cases were all, for the most part, were really just out there, if you will. And more often than not, the episode of the week was more about David and Maddie and Agnes and Bert to some degree, as opposed to let's go solve a case.
Yeah, and I also had sort of thought that Curtis Armstrong was around the whole time, but he doesn't come till season 3.
Yeah, for some reason, I did remember he was not around for the first couple of seasons, and then they brought him on board.
And we haven't even talked about the stars, Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis, an unknown at the time. Sybil Shepherd, a known entity. Mm-hmm. The draw of the show, as you were. The reason I tuned in, because she was a former model and famous actress and personality, because she had been with Peter Bogdanovich, big filmmaker. And I don't know, I just knew of her.
I think I knew of her too, but I honestly don't know or even have any sense of why I started tuning in when this show came on the air. With a lot of shows, I can either remember it or at least look at the show as it exists and say, oh, I understand why I was interested in that show. But in this case, I don't know what it was. But for some reason, I started watching it and I watched it until the very end. So there was something about it, obviously, that piqued my interest and kept my interest to some degree or another, and as long as it aired.
Well, it was on ABC from March 3rd, 1985 to May 14th, 1989. So a significant portion, well, all of the late 80s, right? And aired 66 or 67 episodes, depending on whether they count the pilot as 2 episodes or 1.
which is not as many as you would expect from a show that was on the air for 5 years. And that was because of the production issues and that came about for a variety of reasons over the course of the show in terms of the number of episodes they were actually able to make.
Well, it is quite possible to say that Moonlighting and Glencairn broke the television model as well as the fourth wall, because it is interesting that basically he was like, yeah, but why do I have to do 23 episodes? And then just proceeded to not.
Well, to a certain degree, at some point, circumstances took that out of his hands, whether it be Sybil Shepherd's pregnancy or Bruce Willis's
shoulder injury.
Yes, and things like that. And then, of course, there were the ongoing production issues of them getting episodes done on time. So there was a whole bunch of things that I think prevented them from making the normal 20 to 24, 26 episodes a year that were pretty standard during that time.
And it makes him both ahead of his time a little bit. You know, if you were like, oh, we're only going to need 8 episodes a season from you, 10 episodes a season from you, then suddenly they did just that, basically.
I think, though, that at the time, ABC would have been absolutely positively thrilled to have 20 plus episodes a season, probably as many as they could make because the show is a hit, which meant more revenue. So the more new episodes they had, the more money they could make, which of course is why ABC and NBC and CBS, et cetera, exist in the first place. They're there to make money. They're not just there just to entertain us. That's incidental.
That's incidental.
Absolutely.
It's just look at the shiny object and now buy some cigarettes.
Exactly. To make those people happy. So they'll give us more money.
So they'll give us more money. Yeah. So then we can pay for the show. It's an interesting model, one we seem to be going back to.
I know. Isn't it fascinating?
Apparently they couldn't come up with anything better.
And very, very predictable. Anyway, that's another story for another day. But getting back to the late 80s in terms of television, I think it goes without saying that ABC would have loved as many episodes as they were able to or willing to make for a variety of reasons. They didn't make nearly as many episodes, I think, as ABC would have liked.
Well, and it is the first show where I remember there being knowledge of a fan base that wanted something from the show that it wasn't delivering. Right? That happens all the time now because of the internet, because of social media, that basically fans instantly are giving their response to an episode. They're instantly able to respond, talk to filmmakers and television makers and stars and start a whole, I don't like this. I want that. I want to ship this relationship. I want this to happen. Why did they do this? Sort of the modern way of television is that you're going to have instant feedback. And it's very easy to give feedback on a television show now. At the time, the only way to do it was to write letters and make phone calls.
Right.
I can't think of another, other than shows being canceled. I don't think of it. Well, there weren't a lot of shows where it's like there was an expectation that there would be an episode and then there wasn't one and they did a rerun.
Moonlighting was a unicorn in that respect because for a variety of reasons, some of which I'll never understand, the network sort of let this go on as it continued to happen.
I don't think they knew how to stop it. I think the train had left the station and they were like, well, we want it to be different. But they didn't. They were like, but at the same time, we can't touch anything.
Well, they could have, taken the drastic step of saying to Glenn, thanks. We're going to bring somebody on board who's going to write and run the show in a way that will ensure that we get the episodes that we need to air when we need them. Thank you very much.
Well, and nowadays, if you are a young creator who has not run a television show, they pair you with a more powerful television person who has, and I think that was Jay Daniel. Maybe, but Jay Daniels was basically just making what Glenn wanted, which is good. You want that if you're the creator of a show. But it was just so interesting because it was so hard to get the sense of the cultural differences between the 80s and now and how feedback took longer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was hard to respond in the moment We weren't used to American Idol. There wasn't the call in and give your opinion right now while it's on the air.
It was like Jerry Lewis's telethon.
It was
the only thing
yes,
was live.
and Saturday Night Live. And the call and response of this show was the beginning of that kind of thing.
Well, there were other shows like Cagney and Lacey that were saved by the audience.
Right. I definitely think when a show got canceled or was going to be canceled, or there was talk about being canceled that was beloved, then definitely television viewers. But it was the beginning of television viewers finding that power in the 80s, right? Fighting the cancellation of shows and being successful at it with Cagney and Lacey and with several shows after. So it was the beginning of sort of the consumer finding their power in entertainment.
And technology allowing for easing the way to get to the people who are making these decisions en masse, to let them know and let their voice be heard, because it was much more difficult before that.
It was organizing fan power to write letters and make phone calls and write letters in your local newspaper. That was part of the campaign for these television shows.
Well, the local newspaper was very important when it came to the editorial page.
Yep.
Nobody knows what that is anymore.
It's an opinion page now and
Right.
it's sold to the highest bidder, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, it was a community thing. People would write in, letter to the editor.
Yeah. And I would imagine a lot of people called their local station and said, hey, where's Moonlighting? And the station manager, realizing they got to hire somebody to answer all these phone calls, is calling the network going, what the heck is happening?
Exactly. Because looking through the number of episodes, the first season is short.
It's a half season.
Yeah.
It's a half season.
The other ones, they're short too, but they get, it's like between 16 and 18. So there's a number of weeks where they're throwing out reruns because they just don't have the product. Because every other show on television runs 23.
Yeah. And
full stop.
Again, just the idea that you're rerunning an episode, not in the summer,
right?
But not after you finished your season, but just because you
don't have anything. Well, we better show something.
Can't have dead air for an hour.
Yeah. So people, I'm sure, got upset.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk some more about, shall we start with the pilot and kind of go from there?
Yes.
Yeah, it was clear to me from the first episode that there was some sort of spark between the characters that played by Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. Having said that, I'm usually not a fan of the will they or won't they of it in most shows, with Remington Steele being one of the exceptions, mainly because of the way in which that was presented. But nevertheless, you just couldn't help but love the roguish David Addison, because he was fun more than anything
super
else.
Fun.
You know,
they do have a chemistry. You do go, oh, I like watching these two people try to figure it out. What's funny is from the pilot, I only had remembered the scenes of them in the office. I didn't remember anything about any case. I didn't remember there were a ton of people in there. I was just sort of remembering when we were watching it again, and I was like, oh my God, wait, what is happening? I know one way they can make enough money to save the agency. Maybe they have to fire some employees that don't have anything to do. And you're like waiting for them to have a conversation about that. The entire first two seasons.
Addison needs an audience to do all of his antics.
His antics.
But I totally forgot too. When I watched it again, I'm like, who are all these people in the office? I thought it was just Miss Dipesto.
Yeah, I did too.
That was it.
I just remembered the characters. I remembered David. I remembered Maddie. I remembered Agnes Dipesto, and I remembered Bert. But I didn't really remember anything in terms of the actual cases, because that to me wasn't what the show was about.
No. I remember the dialogue.
Oh, yes.
That was so unusual for television at the time. It was so theatrical. It was so much, kind of old classic movies, which I loved. It was, that same kind of spark that you saw in the sort of romantic comedies and screwball comedies of the day that had a class, like a lot of words. I was very excited by all the words in the show, and the verbal banter and the quickness of the show. It was one of those shows that would have benefited greatly from being on VHS or digital, where you can go, wait, what did they just say? Wait, I want to go back and hear, because that's the first instinct, is to be like, I need this to rerun so that I can hear every line.
Or at least hear more of the lines, because there's absolutely no way to hear it, but which is kind of part of the fun, is you're sitting there going, the technique of it all. It was fantastic.
It was really wonderful. And I think I had forgotten just how game Sybil Shepherd is for playing basically the straight woman, even more so than, say, Stephanie Zimbalist, because she's the newbie too. She's incredibly stylish. She's incredibly gorgeous. And yet you also are like, oh, she may be able to make this happen. She may be able to rein him in just enough and yet have this sort of bounce of life back in her life.
And at no point did she come across as a dumb blonde.
No.
Her character was obviously very intelligent, very able. And when she said she wanted to try to put this business on its feet, you're like, I believe you can, if that's what you want to do. She was clearly the adult in the room.
Which is both awesome, because she did a really good job of doing that, but it's also the role that women are often put into, is being the adult in the room that's making sure that things are happening so that the guy in the room can just be wacky and fun and awesome and come up with genius ideas.
But like with Remington Steele, though, it was clear who the boss was. Yes, in this case, it was definitely Maddie. And over time, I think she wore him down more than the other way around. That he had to start towing the line a bit more in order to make things happen, to make things, as much as he may have pushed back against it and never lost, a lot of his Davidness. But still, he's the one that had to bend to her will to a certain extent, and when it came to business, at least. Yeah.
I think that weirdly, she stayed in charge a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Even not necessarily on the cases, but in the office.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard not to be talking about Remington Steele and make comparisons to Remington Steele.
Well, they're both shows with a man and a woman trying to run a detective agency. Obviously, the circumstances are different, but still, the flamboyant guy and the steady woman is basically the same.
I thought the pilot held up pretty great, better than I anticipated. There was a moment, probably 20 years ago, where I did revisit Moonlighting, just because I was sort of buying DVDs at the time, I think, or something. I was
Weren't we all?
Yes. And watched some episode. I don't know if it was the pilot. And I was a little bit like, oh, this isn't. I called up my sister and said, we thought this show was so great. And we thought this show was so feminist. And she's like, it's not, is it? And I'm like, I don't think it is. Now, that was a long time ago, but it wasn't the 80s. And so I was fully expecting to not enjoy rewatching Moonlighting as much as I enjoyed rewatching Remington Steele. And yet, I think I did enjoy it more than I did at that point in my life, whenever that was that I did, However, is this show feminist and is it progressive?
I don't think it's either of those things.
Yeah.
And it certainly wasn't intended to be. And it was, as you said earlier, Glenn Gordon Caron wanted to break the mold. And he wasn't particularly careful about how he did that. He just thought detective shows were ridiculous. So he's going to write what he considers to be kind of a ridiculous show. So no, I don't think it is. And I don't think, gosh, I just don't remember, but I don't think I thought it was then even. Yeah, I can't imagine that I thought it was feminine. I thought it was fun. I thought it was entertaining, but I don't think in any way that I thought it was feminist back when I was watching it originally, and certainly not when I was watching it this time.
And I thought that she holds her own a lot more than I gave her credit for in my first rewatch again. And I have much more appreciation for how challenging that particular job is to not only look ridiculously beautiful, but do all of that banter and all of that stuff.
Well, she does a lot of pratfalls. They do physical comedy.
Physical comedy. Like, she's doing goofy stuff, and yet looks classy the whole time.
Very much like, Kate Hepburn in the 30s.
Yeah.
Bringing Up Baby.
Yeah.
Philadelphia Story.
It's stunning.
Yeah. And not to mention the breadth of style and genre and everything else that they did. She had to sing in a nightclub in one episode. They did Shakespeare in another episode. Every week they're doing, their version of 30s, movies with all this snappy banter between the characters. And you just never knew what the heck was going to be coming at you next. And she held her own. By far, not just held her own, she excelled.
She excelled at it.
Yeah, she's very funny.
She's very funny. And that's such a hard role to be funny in. It's such a different character from the Stephanie Zimbalist character in Remington Steele, from Laura Holt. Laura Holt, who is, I don't need a man. I don't want a man. I want to run my agency. I just want to be the best detective in the world. And that's all I care about. And then I get a little sidetracked by this guy who's walked in, who's both a hindrance and a helpmate to that. And yet this is she's just a different beast.
Yeah. What do they call it? The fish out of water?
She's a fish out of water. She's learning to be a detective. She has no idea what she's doing. And yet she's also with crazy people. And yet you kind of buy it. Like, there's something about it. You totally buy it. You totally buy that she's like, this is what I'm going to be trying to do. With very little kind of laid out for you story-wise or even character-wise. It's all built by her as an actress.
And I think she's the voice and the vision of the audience, who's like, these crazy people that I'm supposed to be working with and trying to earn enough money to, keep the agency open and to hopefully make some money to live off of. And if you're walking into this room, how are you going to handle this? And I thought she was very good at being the eyes and ears and the voice of those of us sitting out in the audience going, these people are nuts. I don't know if I could deal with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Miss Dipesto, like, she's dropped into a very goofy world and is both very serious and also embracing the goofy. And that's just so unique. That's one of the things I'm like, that's one of the things that was so unique about the show. And so again, even though it's not a feminist show, she's such a unique female character. There's something that feels like it allows another space for women to live in. It's always dangerous when women are funny and beautiful, I think. I think that ends up causing a lot of trouble for certain people, and it's not allowed. But just the ownership that she has in the space and on that screen, it was really interesting to revisit this show because of her, because of them, because of the breaking apart of television storytelling, which had been done, when you look at the older shows that Glenn mentions, but hadn't been done like this in the modern era.
I think they were more filmic.
They were very filmic.
He says he wanted to do film, so he was squishing a 2-hour film into an hour of television.
Yeah. Well, not a lot of 2-hour plots, just a lot of concepts.
Yeah, I'm not saying 2-hour plot, but the idea, the bigness of film was different than television at the time.
Yeah.
That's what he's breaking away from.
Yeah.
Now you have
every
Game
television show looks like $10 million because it's It cost anywhere from $7 to $20 million now, an episode of television, which is insane for the big stuff. Or it costs, $100,000 and it's made by people who aren't getting paid right. But it's fine. But that first season is so interesting too. The other episodes in that first season that stand out for me is The Next Murder You Hear.
Yeah, same for me. And as I was rewatching it, I thought it was so interesting the way it opened. The episode's about a DJ who apparently is murdered on air. And the opening is showing all these people across Los Angeles who are listening to this. And so we're getting the sense of the city and these people in these various places, whether they be at home or at work or wherever in their car, listening to this. And this is where they listen to the show and how they listen. It just felt so unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the way I think most television shows then, certainly, and maybe even now, open their show, because they will spend more, and who knows why, but there are a lot of reasons why it may have happened that way. But usually they give as much screen time as possible to their leads when it's on a television show. And this is taking away 5 minutes of screen time from their leads and relying on the audience to stick around and be immersed in this world and listening to this voice as these people around the city are listening to. I was totally enthralled.
It's a very filmic opening.
Mm-hmm.
To Melissa's point. It is about setting a tone, setting the case up, which does happen in detective shows.
And it also sets a tone that carries through the rest of the episode as they're going through the case and trying to find this guy. It's not, I don't know. I just found it to be fascinating.
It was unique then, and it actually holds up, I think, as unique now. Because you're also telling the story of 80s radio.
Right.
And how many people across a city listen to their local radio station and their local DJ, either in the morning or late at night, or just the way that people listen to podcasts now, but it was live.
Right.
And things could happen. And so, I thought that one was a standout. The other thing that was sort of standout was them, again, continuing to figure out how Maddie and David were going to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that starting to develop in a really interesting way where she gets to be like, oh, I'm good at this, So it's also got a little bit of Scarecrow Mrs. King in it. She's bringing her special model skills, which have to do with being famous, to help. The one thing that was a little bit annoying is this constant, we're out of money. We don't have a case. We don't have a thing. And you're like, there's 12 people in the other room.
They're giant overhead. Fancy office.
Your fancy office in Century
City.
City.
Lots of employees.
I think that was Glenn Caron having a little fun with the audience, because he's probably thinking the audience is sitting there going, yeah, exactly that. But what about why don't
and
you
they don't even do a throwaway line like we can't put these people out of work.
Right.
I'm telling you, they're the chorus. They're
But they don't even do enough for the chorus in that early days.
They're his
chorus.
He comes out, and because a lot of it in the beginning, he's dancing on tabletops with Mexican hats, and she's saying, get your act together, and it happens in front of the employees.
Yeah.
Season 2 has a couple of just really fantastic episodes.
Season 2 starts with the opening. Right? It's the fourth wall break.
Okay.
It literally starts with Maddie and David talking to the camera and saying, we're a little short in the episode, time-wise. And so someone going, our show isn't long enough, and we have to add a scene of us just talking about how it's not long enough because we talk too fast, is just such an insane concept. So it's breaking the fourth wall because it's having these characters say what's going on and that they're in a television show. And then they break it again at the end of where they yell cut. And then suddenly there's Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. That was like, oh, wait, we're not playing by the rules anymore. And just the idea that like, oh, wait, I guess television shows do need to be a certain amount of time. It never occurred to me, even though they were. But that you had to hit that. You don't have to hit it at podcasting. Thank you very much. And you guys know we don't. You don't have to hit it in streaming anymore.
Nope.
But you had to hit it then. And that's sometimes hard to do.
Very hard to do.
So one of the first sets I went on to was the A-Team. It was actually the second set I went on to. The first set was Hardcastle and McCormick.
Your favorite.
My favorite. It may be one of the reasons it's my favorite, because they were filming at USC.
Oh, perfect.
I was walking to the library and I couldn't get into the library because they were filming in front of it. And USC has a beautiful library. Absolutely gorgeous.
Yes, they do.
But I got to watch. And so a couple of my new friends, I mean, this was freshman year, I think. I don't even know. I felt like I was just there. And then suddenly I'm like, what? There's filming on the campus. So we stood there and we watched, and then we, talked to somebody. Hi, what are you doing there? And then we met the cinematographer, the DP, met the sound guy. The sound guy turned out to be a guy named Fast Eddie Mailer. He's credited as Fast Eddie Mailer.
Fantastic.
He worked on a ton of 80s television. He was also one of the sound recorders for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But he let us stand by his sound cart, which is a safe place to stand on a set because you're not going to be in the shot.
That's right. And they have headsets.
And they have headsets, and you can listen to the take. And he was very nice. He was like, if you want to come to the set again, we shoot in these makeshift stages that used to be warehouses in Culver City. And I was like, why, yes, sir, I would love to come. So I called him up and I went over one other afternoon and took the bus. Didn't have a car. So I took the bus from USC to Culver City.
It's a ride.
It's a ride. And he was doing more Hardcastle and McCormick that day, but they wrapped early. And he was like, you like the A-Team, right? And I was like, yes, sir. He's like, hold on a second. Let me see, because I think they're shooting across the way. And so they called over, and I got to walk over to the set of the A-Team, which I was a huge fan of.
That's perfect.
And he said it'll be okay because they're just shooting some pickups.
It wasn't the full cast.
It wasn't the full cast.
Yeah.
It was Dirk Benedict, and it wasn't Mr. T or George Peppard. They were doing a scene with basically Dirk Benedict in a bar waiting for talking to somebody, and they were shooting it because they needed to add, 3 minutes to the show.
See, there you go.
You didn't time it out right?
No.
Things happen. You cut it short. Didn't come out as long as you thought it was. But you think about it, like that's tough. That's tough to hit that 48-minute mark.
Well, especially because of the way they wrote the scripts for Moonlighting, and that I'm sure it was hard to time it because you couldn't use the usual method, which is page count, which typically gives you a better sense of how long it's going to be. And because of the amount of dialogue in Moonlighting, they just probably just didn't have much of an idea of where they were landing.
And the overlapping. There was a ton of overlapping dialogue between those two.
But it was very exciting to be on the set of the A-Team. And Dirk Benedict was very nice to me.
Very nice.
I was very much in a huge crush on Dirk Benedict.
Oh, of course. From the Cylon days. What was it?
Starbuck.
Yes, he was Starbuck.
He was Battlestar Galactica.
Yes. The OG. The OG Starbuck. That was a very exciting time. Brittany and I would later return to the set of the A-Team when they were shooting down in Orange County in their last season. And while the first time I went to visit the A-Team, it was an early season and everyone was happy.
Yeah. By the end, not so happy.
It was a very unhappy set. George Peppard tried to have us thrown off the set.
Aww.
We were standing by the cart, and apparently George Peppard didn't like it. We said nothing to nobody. We were just there as guests of
He just was
Eddie.
Pissed off.
And so the AD came to send us away, and we're like, oh, yes, so sorry. When we apologize. And then Eddie came back from wherever he was, and he was like, no, they're not leaving. They're my guests. He was like, that's ridiculous. He has no right.
Well, that's true.
And he said no. And we stayed because
Excellent.
Eddie told us to
Fast
stay.
Eddie. Yay.
Fast Eddie told us to stay, but I felt very bad the whole time.
They're tense.
It was very tense.
Yeah.
It was very, very tense. I did not enjoy that set visit.
Another side of show business.
Oh, that was a sidebar, wasn't it? Okay.
Good one, though.
But it was a very interesting lesson about, they had to jump in and shoot this scene and throw it in. But Moonlighting did it in a way in their first episode back that basically, I think, also announced, guess what? We're not on the rails anymore.
And they did it again. I'm sure there were many times they did, but they did it again in another really good season 2 episode called Twas the Episode Before Christmas. Though this one ended with a fourth wall breaking serenade of the audience with the entire crew singing a Christmas carol. Dave and Maddie and the rest of the gang walk out of the office set, and then there's the entire crew there. They walk towards them and they just show them all singing as fake snow is falling, and their kids are with them and probably significant others just singing away. It was great.
Yeah, that's fun.
It's really very sweet. And it's very unexpected. Like, it literally, they're doing a scene and then suddenly they're walking off the set and you're like, wait, and people are singing carols, and it's a good portion. Then they sing the whole carol. Like, they just
like three verses.
Yeah.
That was a really short episode. They had to fill some time.
But it also showcases how many people
Right, which
were
you don't
working
know.
on that show. And you sort of really, again, there wasn't anybody showing us how television was made. As somebody, or, if you weren't in Los Angeles and you didn't have a bookstore that might carry the 2 books written about how television got made, there wasn't a way to figure out how things got made. Star Wars, I think, was one of the films that inspired a lot of people to go to film school, and inspired me to go to film school, mostly because of all the behind the scenes. It was the first time that they made a big deal that this movie was made, that it took all these people behind the scenes
To do it,
painting little tiny ships and shooting these Death Star that was the size of a beach ball, and not the Death Star,
Right.
but also like, oh, somebody wrote this, somebody directed this. And when you pan over from that Moonlighting and see how many people are making that show happen, there were people that were like, I want to do that. I have no doubt, because that's what happened to me. That can be a job. You can do that. Let's go. You can make stuff for a living. I think that's one of the reasons that Moonlighting was so loved in the industry.
Mm-hmm. And, this episode also gives Elise Beasley's Agnes Dipesto more to do than stand and say rhymes into the phone when people call. Because she's the one that finds a baby, and she's front and center as this whole episode goes along.
Yeah. I also really liked Maddie and Miss Dipesto's relationship, Agnes's relationship throughout the show. By the end of that show, they're friends and in many ways somewhat equal.
And I don't remember even from the beginning, Maddie treating Agnes with anything but respect.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And she, could have been snooty about it, or, been like, oh, she's part of the clown show, but that wasn't the case. And I think that was great to see.
I like the My Fair David. That's episode 5 of season 2. It comes right after the dream sequence. Always rings twice, which is just obvious. It's so on the list. It's kind of in its own list. Of course, it's one of the best episodes for so many reasons. But My Fair David is fun because it is Maddie and David making a bet that he can't act like a mature adult. And if he loses, it's the first time they talk about he must fire 2 employees. And if she loses, she's got a limbo right in front of the staff. And David loses the bet, which is the right thing to do. But then Maddie lets him off the hook, and they don't fire those 2 employees, even though they have no cases and they're constantly broke.
Somehow they make payroll, apparently, or these people are working for free.
Season 2 is the season where this show is the most moonlighting it will ever be. The Lady in the Iron Mask has the goofiness of basically a bunch of people dressed up as a woman in a black veil running after each other, 2 of which are men. Like, it's just insane. For kind of no reason. So I think that's the moment where basically we're just going to end these cases with chaotic madness. You know, whether it's a chase scene, whether we're going to throw pillows in various vases. It's like we're never going to really take the ensuing climax of the show seriously as you would in other shows. That was one of my favorites. Okay, this is probably a good time to take a break. We'll be back. Alrighty. And we're back. We hit the candy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's me.
Well, Melissa didn't bring any to share.
Well,
I
I can.
think.
She could go back and get the candy from the kitchen. Yeah.
I can.
What'd you have, Melissa?
An Almond Joy.
Almond Joy has nuts.
Mounds don't.
Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
And a Snicker Snacker.
You know, we should do an episode about 80s commercials.
Clearly, my God, I can sing too many of them.
All right. I see an episode ahead for us. Maybe we should make that a crossover with one of the other 80s shows.
That would be fun.
That would be fun. Okay.
Are we ready for season 3?
We are ready, except for I want to shout out Dennis Christopher in The Lady in the Iron Mask, who is from Breaking Away and who is also from The Lost Room, which my husband executive produced, and he's an awesome actor in person. All right. So, yes, let's go to season 3.
Well, my all-time favorite episode is from season 3, and it's Big Man on Mulberry Street. I adore this episode, probably mostly because of the dance sequence. Which I just absolutely adore. I had no idea that Bruce Willis could dance. I knew he was a singer.
He can't really. I mean, if you look hard, but it's fine. He does a very good job of.
He was
standing
so
in the right
good.
place.
Yes, he was so good in this one, and I just love that episode.
It is a beautiful episode, and I love that Stanley Donen directed it.
Yes,
I love this episode too because I love musicals. I love dance and music. I made a dance music film, music video in film school.
And I love Billy Joel.
And we love Billy Joel. And this was Billy Joel at the height of Billy Joelness. Yeah. So that one is just beautiful and gorgeous, and everybody looks gorgeous in it. That one is a great, great one. It's a great episode. You know, anytime there's a musical number, I'm in for the most part. It's followed by Atomic Shakespeare, which everyone loves, and it gets noted in all the top 10 episodes of Moonlighting lists. It's not one of my favorite.
Really?
And I think that's a little sacrilegious to say because it's super creative. I totally love that it's super creative. You know, the challenge of basing anything on Kiss Me Kate. I mean, not Kiss Me Kate, but Taming of the Shrew.
Well, I think of Kiss Me Kate first.
Yes, I do too.
Speaking of musicals.
Kiss Me Kate, which is based on Taming of the Shrew.
Right.
Which is also 10 Things I Hate About You, which is also so many adaptations of, you know, a guy basically being paid to court a woman who is a shrew or some sort of horrible creature.
Has a mind of her own, basically.
Has a mind of her own, but is considered horrible in the context of everybody else's world and society. And then they truly fall in love. It's not one of my favorite Shakespeare. I love performances of it. I love male-female dynamics. You know, I love that stuff. But this one in particular, I was just like, okay. I mean, I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. I appreciated that it was huge out of the box. I know people love it. It just it's weirdly one of the top 10 episodes that doesn't work for me.
I love it. I am in the love it camp with this episode. Partially, I think, because I do love Kiss Me Kate, the musical.
Yes.
And it reminded me very much of that with some little tweaks here and there, which were appreciated. And I just like the whole idea of it, that they took this TV show and basically did Shakespeare for an hour. I mean, to a large Shakespeare type of show for an hour. Who does that, for goodness sake?
Well, and not only that, but they immediately break the fourth wall by having some kid who gets sent to do his Shakespeare homework and can't watch Moonlighting. So it reminds me of one of my favorite books and movies, The Princess Bride, and the framework of the storytelling that's in the book and the movie. But
it was a day of probably one TV in the house.
That's true.
So if, chances are, depending on how late the kid gets to stay up, they might have been sitting in front of the TV. There might have been more sitting in front of the TV than maybe would be today.
But it is the challenge of, if you had homework to do, you could not watch television. We could not watch television before homework was done. And the challenge was, it wasn't 24-hour, 7 days, 57 streaming channels. It was, if you missed it, unless it was Moonlighting, you had to wait till summer. If it was Moonlighting, you could probably catch it the following week. Anyway, it is very clever.
Mm-hmm.
I love, the iambic pentameter. I love the play. There's so much wordplay that's really quite wonderful. I love the visual gags, when she's throwing all the vases and she's got her vase throwing shelf. So there's really great stuff. It's fun because it's also a nod to their relationship in a unique way throughout the episode. But just for me, I'm like, that sort of, we're doing Shakespeare in a wacky way. It's just not my kind of Shakespeare. It's really the Shakespeare of it all.
Oh, interesting.
Than anything else.
Well, everything's not everybody's favorite.
It's true. And I love some Shakespeare, but that style of Shakespeare is not my favorite.
As I'm thinking about it, I don't think I've ever seen Shakespeare performed on stage. It's only been through the movies.
You didn't come see my show?
No, I did not.
You didn't come see an Appalachian 12th Night?
No.
Oh, do I just have to say it is the best Shakespeare ever I've seen performed on stage. It was the only thing that I actually understood what was going on, Well, you've not seen it. You've not gone to the Shakespeare plays of all your friends.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're like, what's going on? I don't know what they're saying. But no, huge fan of Appalachian 12th Night.
It was a real magical show.
Brilliant.
It was adapted by Robert Williams and produced by Robert and Sean, and they asked me to direct it, and it was the show that got me back into theater. That's funny. I was trying to make everybody I knew go to it, but I must have missed you.
No, it's one of the many gaps in my,
Listen, I would not have gone myself if I hadn't directed it at that point in my life. But then, of course, I produced a Shakespeare album, and then I've produced a Macbeth. All right. But yes, it is one of the most famous episodes. And you know what? You're right. There's some really classic Moonlighting episodes in season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Season 2 is where it finds itself.
Yeah,
it truly is. The training wheels are off. But then, of course, season 3, episode 9, The Straight Poop, I love. And also, this is the season that introduces Curtis Armstrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he starts to be a lovely, he and Agnes get a lot more to do in this season. But The Straight Poop was pretty brilliant in doing a clip show in a really clever way and sort of, again, breaking the fourth wall in an insane way that you just didn't see. It just didn't occur to anybody that you could do that with television. Are you a fan of the Christmas episode here, season 3, episode 8, It's a Wonderful Job?
I don't think on this rewatch that I watched it.
Yeah, it's sort of a take on It's a Wonderful Life, except that Maddie is having a bad day and things are going wrong. So she blows up at the agency, at everybody, and then goes to a bar and is drinking in a bar and she basically said, I wish I never, stayed with this agency. And then a guardian angel basically says, okay, I've made that happen.
It actually is one that I did watch, but it didn't stick with me. Which means that I'm sure I liked it well enough, but there were others that kind of...
That more stuck.
Yeah.
The one thing that I struggle with is that without the agency, she's like a sad person.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone else is doing great. It's sort of a little bit of an opposite of It's a Wonderful Life, where he doesn't exist in It's a Wonderful Life, but everybody else is doing kind of sad because of it. The town is doing sad. And, and in this case, everyone's doing great, except Maddie is so despondent. And you're like, okay, I don't buy it. She's Maddie Hayes. She's pretty good at a lot of things. She's proven herself. And she's gorgeous. So she might have a sad life, but it's not going to be a miserable existence life because that's not that character. So I felt that was not fair. That episode was not fair to the character or accurate to the character of Maddie Hayes, even though it's a fantasy episode and it's all these things. I still think you have to play by the rules of your characters.
Right.
But it does have a great gag for 80s television fans in that she goes to the Blue Moon Detective Agency when she's like, but it's still there, right? Like, so she goes, she's like, I got to go back to the agency. And she goes to the Blue Moon Detective Agency, only it's not the Blue Moon Detective Agency. It's Heart to Heart's agency.
That's right.
They've opened an office there. And I thought that was a great gag. You don't see the hearts.
Right.
But
you see Max.
You see Max.
Max, that's his name.
And Bruce Willis is married to Cheryl Tiegs.
I watched this episode. Why don't I remember it? Interesting.
Lionel Standard, Max.
Oh, yes.
So I was like, that's a great gag. I love that part of this. And I don't mind everyone doing well.
It sounds like maybe what they were trying to do is not do what It's a Wonderful Life did, which is everybody else is miserable.
Yeah. And then we start getting into Sam. Sam comes into season 3. The absolutely gorgeous Mark Harmon at the height of his gorgeousness.
Mm-hmm.
And being a third to break up Maddie and David a little bit. But the show starts to go in crazy directions at that point, right? Wow. Sharon's not even going to talk about it.
Crazy as crazy does. And there's kind of reasons for some of it.
I love Mark Harmon. I love, now she's with this person and that person. There's a moment where she runs back to David and goes into his house and it's empty of furniture, which is so interesting. Such an interesting character thing. And you're like, okay, I totally buy that. It's extreme, but I see it. And it's that I can't count on you to be an adult. And that clearly proves it, even though I'm attracted to you. And I have an astronaut. And so that sort of wraps up season 3, those 3 episodes or 4 episodes. But then she doesn't want him. Now that's fine. I'm fine with the perfect man on paper comes in and is perfect, but is really actually not right. And then season 4, Sharon's looking at me. Well, you should see it. It's not an impressed.
I just have to admit, I watched just a few season 4 and season 5 episodes because it just really got messier and messier as time went on.
For this season, Glenn Gordon Caron had gone off to direct a film. He basically left the show because they didn't want him to come back.
But season 4 is when Bruce Willis went off to make Die Hard, and Sybil Shepherd was pregnant with twins. And there were many episodes where they had to shoot them creatively to get them in scenes together. And
yeah, I think by this point, they are literally not on set at the same time.
Yeah.
90% of the time.
And knowing that, I couldn't not see it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I hadn't known it, I think they handled it pretty well. But now that I know that that's what's happening, it's all I can see when I'm watching the episodes when ostensibly they're going to be in the room together. Season 4 was hard to watch.
In television lore, they talk about if you've had the will they, won't they, and then they do, can you come back from that? Can you continue to have the same dynamic or a better dynamic? Or is it the death toll of the show?
Well, it's interesting because out of all shows, I think Cheers did it better than anybody.
Yeah.
They got them together. They broke them up. And that basically was all she wrote because they really didn't belong together. I can't think of another show that did it well. There might be one or two.
There are some people that go, this was the end of the show. Then when they slept together, it became uninteresting to fans. I think that's not necessarily has to happen.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But I think the challenge of season 4 is they're just not together. There are literally episodes where they're not in the same city.
Right.
So, because she flies away. So a significant number of the episodes, they never have scenes together. And so that, I think, is a real challenge when that is the engine of the show.
Right.
It is the engine of the show.
And had really become the engine of the show as the first 3 seasons came along. And they spent less time on the case of the week and more time on whatever was going on between them, around them. And now suddenly the 2 actors are not able to be in the same place at the same time. And so they have to write all these stories that inexplicably and not very satisfyingly have them apart.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, they're real things. Having twins, I don't even know how you do that and continue to do anything other than have twins, and he did Die Hard. That's insane.
Oh, yeah.
Those are 2 huge life-changing things. But I do think that we don't appreciate how much pregnancy and birth and childbearing and rearing takes time and energy and effort. It's like a production. And guess what? It's hard to do 2 productions at the same time and do them well. That's why when you have series, you have to put one in first position. If you have multiple series, you literally have one in first position.
All the time.
All the time. And I'm going to say it's your children. All right, season 4 and season 5, they're kind of a write-off. There's some highlight scenes. There's some incredible scenes in the 4th and 5th season. Is there an episode?
Not that I found.
I will shout out the last episode just because of the way it ends. Because once again, it does a really, there's an extended breaking the fourth wall where they're literally breaking down the walls around them and breaking down the set. And they're telling them they're canceled. And characters are dying because they're no longer in scenes. And then they try to run away from that ending. I think so much of this show was a little bit of jazz. And sometimes jazz isn't as good when you're making it up on the spot as when you plan it out. I think that this show just really does survive better than I thought it was going to.
Yeah, same. When it was good, it was phenomenal. And the creativity and the chances that they took and just the way that they just made their own rules for storytelling. I haven't seen anything quite like it before or since. You had the sense that you just really had no idea what you were in for every time you turned on the TV. I would imagine each week. What the heck are they going to do this week?
Yeah. It was big swings.
Yeah.
I think it is definitely one of those shows that then broke enough ground for what was allowed on television in a creative way. And that is worth a lot.
I would imagine that shows that do try to do some of the things and try to step outside of the box that their show may be in, owe their ability to do that, as you said, consciously or subconsciously, to Moonlighting, because Moonlighting made it cool and made it okay to try some things.
It was so cool.
Yeah.
It was so cool. When that show was hitting, it was the coolest show television had seen in decades.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And every show wanted to be that cool. All right. Well, there you go. Moonlighting from the point of view of Sharon and Susan. All right, listeners, dear listeners, tell us your favorite Moonlighting episodes.
We'd also love your thoughts on which ones you think we absolutely should check out, just in case it's one that we missed. We're always interested in hearing what you think.
go to 80stvladies.com and let us know. All right. You want to take us out?
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.